morning. My name is Chris Culver, and as Commodore of New York Yacht Club, I want to welcome you to another special presentation organized by the New York Yacht Club Seamanship Committee, chaired by our own David Tunick. It's a beautiful day in Newport, and I hope it is wherever you are. I want to make sure that I hope everyone enjoys this program today. We are so pleased to and proud to have this as a cross-Burgee event with the Cruising Club of America, and I'm going to be introducing Commodore Bob Medlin very soon, as well as Storm Trysail Club, and I know Commodore Ed Cesar is on as well. You know, the collaboration amongst our clubs has been an ongoing discussion for several years, especially around the important topic of safety at sea. And we look forward to a continued path forward in these important collaborative efforts. You know, a recent study of fatalities has shown that traditional methods of recovering overboard crew members should be improved. And that's one of the cornerstone reasons we are here this morning. The Seamanship Committee for the club, and in collaboration with Storm Trysail and CCA, we work hard to provide the best information and support for all of our collective members. And these are, we found to be very important. The feedback is most welcome at the end of all of these events. Our members, Dick York, the newly appointed head of safety at sea for U.S. Sailing, and our own ambassador, Rich Dumoulin, a veteran of 4 America's Cup campaigns and 25 Newport Bermuda races, will instruct us in new practices and safety equipment designed to improve the chances of successful recovery. And now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to hand it over to my fellow Commodore, Bob Medlin. And Bob, please take it away, and a good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Commodore Culver, and thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to members and guests of the New York Yacht Club, the Cruising Club of America, and the Storm Trysail Club. On behalf of the CCA, it's our extreme pleasure to sponsor this morning's presentation as a cross-Burgee event with our 3 clubs. It's wonderful to see so many friends and colleagues participating. A big thank you to Dick York and Rich Dumoulin for arranging this splendid seminar, Advances in MOB Recovery, with our esteemed panelists sharing their lessons and experiences for our benefit. We look forward to hearing how planning, preparation, practice, teamwork, and leadership contribute to a culture of safety and protect ourselves. Thank you very much. And I'd now like to hand it over to Commodore Ed Cesar of the Storm Trysail Club. Ed?
Yeah, thank you, Commodore, and thank you, Commodore Culver. On behalf of the members of Storm Trysail, we're delighted to participate. I think the sentiments about our club's collaboration are spot on. And I want to thank Dave Tunick and Dick and Rich for organizing not only this seminar, but all of the informational material that's been going on this year. I think one of the side benefits or one of the silver linings of the pandemic is giving us all a chance to make best use of Zoom and also to find time to think about safety. And I think everyone will be better off for it once we get back on the water.
Thank you, New York Yacht Club Commodore Culver, Commodore Medlin of the CCA, and Ed Cesar of the Storm Trysail Club. And thank you all out there for attending this morning's seminar. I'm David Tunick, your moderator this morning. I'm chair of the New York Yacht Club Seamanship Committee, a rear Commodore of the CCA, and a very happy member of Storm Trysail. And in fact, the 2 principal speakers are also members of all 3 clubs. I myself have been on boats 3 times that have had men overboard. All 3 were rescued, but all 3 were extraordinarily lucky in the circumstances. So I'm particularly interested myself in the discoveries and new methods of rescue that will be our focus today. So take a minute and imagine you're on Lake Michigan, Long Island Sound, in the Gulf of Maine, San Francisco Bay, or mid-ocean, somewhere in the world, anywhere. It's 2:30 a.m., no moon, blowing 25 knots true, big seas, stinging sideways rain. You're in a berth of sleep, in a deep sleep, having come off a rough watch only a half hour ago. But a repeated shout awakens you, kind of awakens you. And although you're bleary and tired, you understand what you're hearing, what's gotten your attention and beginning to rev up your synapses. The shout is man overboard, man overboard. What do you do? Well, that's what we're here for this morning, to explore in the way of recent discoveries. And you're going to hear principally from two of the best out there on the high seas, Dick York, the organizer of today's event, and Rich DeMullen, probably already known to most of you. In between Dick and Rich, you'll be the beneficiaries of more of the best, our three panelists, when you'll hear firsthand about real-world man overboard recoveries and how the U.S. Navy trains its officers in best practices for retrieving men and women overboard. Some logistics before we begin. The usual, if you have questions, click on the Q&A button that should be at the bottom of your screen when you drag your mouse down. Click where it says Q&A, not chat, and you can type in whatever you wish to ask at any time throughout the program. We'll do our best before we finish to get to every question that comes in. A word about the initials MOB. It stands for man overboard, but generically means a man, a woman, a child. We in the safety world of yachting had tried COB for crew overboard, but there were those who thought it referred to corn. And we've tried PIW for person in the water, but it's MOB that 99% of boaters use. And in fact, that's what's on a lot of emergency buttons that you can click on a boat today. So we use it here today, MOB, without any prejudice to gender. With that, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce my close friend and sometime shipmate, Dick York, who, as you've heard, has just become the head of safety for U.S. Sailing. Dick has also circumnavigated westabout over a 3-year period on his own J46 and has owned a lobster type of powerboat. He sails out of Larchmont Yacht Club, and in his real life spends about 24/7 on safety matters. He recently conducted a groundbreaking study of man overboard fatalities that gives dramatic insight to what contributes most to losses of life at sea. Dick, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. It's a great introduction. Let me begin to share my screen here. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we stand. As David said, we've done some studies, so we're going to talk about some changes we're going to make to our doctrines, and also what is right that we didn't change. Renee is going to talk a lot about practicing on your own boat, and frankly, the Navy does that really well. Michael will talk about an MOB incident, and none of them are standard, folks. Michael's going to talk about one in the middle of the night, shoot up 25 knots, going downwind, surfing at 22, not the right time to have somebody go over. Jeff will also talk about a non-standard MOB recovery, 3 a.m. or so, 70 knot squall, lays your boat aback, and he's going to describe a lot of good seamanship that got him so he could recover the crew that went over. Rich DeMullen's going to talk about staying aboard, some promising new ways of rescuing people, and a little bit about powerboats. So let me go on to my section. Many of you have heard of the incident during the Chicago Mackinac race in 2018. The TP-52 Ameti, with a very experienced crew, started the race. Winds were 17 to 22, gusting to 25, 6-foot seas, close reach, and they lost a man overboard over the stern. He was a 55-year-old triathlete. His vest never inflated. They took 3 attempts to return and recover. They did it within 6 minutes. and never got more than 150 yards away from him. Nonetheless, he drowned. So this incident brought into focus, had a lot of discussion around the sailing and safety community, started bringing in focus the questions we had. It was later punctuated by another drowning, not about at the same time that Michael may tell you about, where a skipper fell off in Monterey Bay. So a number of people went around and asked ourselves, do we need to modify our training? Look, since we first developed our dogma, there's been a lot of changes in boat design and MOB gear. I mean, we don't have the old band buoy poles tied to an old-fashioned horseshoe ring like we used to. We've got some new techniques in MOB recovery and some new tools, such as the AIS unit you may put on your life jacket that will help your boat come back to exactly where you are. So I was lucky enough to be able to manage a study of MOB incidents that David talked about. We took 22 MOB incidents that we had enough detail on, and we had them reviewed by at least 4 of 12 experts in safety at sea. And these are names you'd recognize. I'll read them off because they're helpful people. Ralph Naranjo, Rich DeMullen, Chuck Hawley, Sally Honey, Stan Honey, Tad Lamont, Sheila McCurdy, Michael Maradzada, Karen Prelo, Mark Roy, Ted Parrish. We also looked at 50 other ones, whatever detail we had, and 100 other incidents. And we looked at both successful and unsuccessful recoveries because we wanted to know what we were doing well that actually worked versus what didn't work. So I'm going to run through some of the findings, and I'll do this quickly, but I hope in enough detail so that you all understand the direction we're going. First finding, people drown quickly. I mean, this sounds silly, stupid, but the answer is it does. In terms of prevention, the answer is wear your life vest and make sure it's going to work. When I went around the world, I didn't wear a life vest. I was harnessed and tethered to the boat. I would never do that again. I would wear a life vest and use that to tether myself to the boat. The other thing that we want to reiterate in terms of our training is step 1 has always been to deploy flotation. So that says throw your MOM-8, your man overboard module, deploy that, and anything else in the cockpit that floats, cockpit cushions, anything like that, dump it over the side as soon as you hear you shout man overboard. Number 1 thing, get something so that the person will float by the time you get back to them. Just in case some of you have not seen what the man overboard module is, you can see it here on the back of my boat. I'm reaching back to pull the button.
Pulls the pin to release the MOM-8 or tosses a similar self-launching marker.
Clearly, the MOM-8 is a great tool. The person can hold on to that little horseshoe ring that's been inflated, and with a 6-foot pylon up there with a light on top at night, you have a better chance of seeing somebody in waves. Second topic, stay close to the man overboard. This has always been the standard in the United States. We did a good deep look on this, and the answer is the closer you stay, the shorter the search and return is. So execute the quick stop, or another way to slow the boat immediately. And sometimes it's difficult to do, but you just have to stay close. I'm going to show you a section of the video that David sent out. And by the way, I'm thanking Storm Tristle Foundation for letting us use parts of that video. And here are 2 looks at an upwind quick stop.
The quick stop is named that because that's exactly what it's designed to do.
It's the simplest way to slow down and stop the boat, allowing you to stay as close to the MOB as possible. Once stopped, you can maneuver for a safe recovery.
So here's a second view of that same
The next step is to
segment.
But do not ease the jib sheet. This will slow the boat in place, almost upwind of the man overboard. The boat is in a hove-to position and will move only slowly.
That's what the upwind quick stop looks like. We've also taught the downwind quick stop. And again, we're going to reiterate that. Michael will talk a little bit more about rescuing somebody downwind, but the top two photos show how you can bring the spinnaker in if you luff the boat up. You keep the tack and the sheet tight. In the bottom ones, you can see we've lowered the halyard and brought it down on deck. Obviously, there's an upper wind limit for how far you can carry out this maneuver, but it's probably higher than you think. And it's worth a lot of practice on your own boat to figure out how to do the downwind quick stop. Another finding, and this one is probably the biggest one, biggest change we're going to have is avoid bringing an able MOB alongside. Frankly, and I'm going to be very blunt about this, we've been hitting people with boats because we try to bring the person alongside the boat. It's difficult to steer a boat when it's going slowly, and modern boats have, if you look at them, have thin, high aspect ratio keels and rudders. Many of them have sail drive units that are nowhere near next to the rudder. Like in the old days, you had a big barn door rudder with a prop right in front of it. So the boat slips and stalls, and the blades stall and the boat slips around. Also, frankly, boat handling is difficult in winds and waves when people go overboard. So our change is the first way we're going to teach people is to use a life sling or a throw rope to connect the MOB to the rope, to the boat. Here I am in the last moments of an approach to an MOB. Here's what's going through my mind. Can I bring the woman who's in the water, can I bring her alongside at less than 1 knot? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Whoops, I can't see her because frankly, the bow starts hiding the MOB about this point. And I really hope my spotter tells me where she is. I hope I don't run her over. Am I too far away or am I too close? If I'm too far away, can they grab her? Should I get closer? Is the main drawing too much? All these things are going through your mind as if you try to bring somebody right alongside. So let's go. I'm going to play a short segment of what we teach today, and then I'm going to tell you how we change it.
The boat loses the man overboard. At 2, the boat quickly tacks, leaving the jib aback. This dramatically slows the boat and keeps it near the victim. At 3, the boat reaches away and, in position 4, falls off to a run, dropping the jib, then jibing at position 5. Once well below the victim in position 6, the boat comes up to a close reach and sails to the victim, trimming and luffing the main to control speed as necessary. At position 7, the boat slows to a crawl and connects with the victim through a thrown line or by coming alongside.
So that's where it's bad. How do we bring this boat alongside precisely to bring somebody alongside? And we'll talk about the throw rope later, but the solution we're going to start recommending as number 1 is using the life sling. Again, when most MOB doctrines were developed, we didn't have the life sling, but our friends out in the West Coast at the Sailing Foundation brought this out. It's a great tool. Important points are you don't have to bring the person alongside the boat. Secondary benefits is once the person's in the sling, the MOB is connected to the boat. You don't have to worry, even though the line may be 150 feet long. It's also a tool to lift them out of the water because the sling acts like a sling. So I'll give you another short.
The life sling is a floating collar-like sling with a 150-foot long recovery line, the bitter end of which is tied to the stern of the boat. It's easily deployed when necessary.
Man overboard! Flotation!
You begin a LifeSling quick stop the same way you would with a regular quick stop. Deploy handy flotation and tack the boat with the jib aback.
Right where it is. Keep the jib where it is.
Watch out that you do not cross the LifeSling's tow line. Circle the man overboard as usual, but leave the jib up and unfurled as you may need it later in maneuvering. The victim can grab it, work his way to the sling collar, and put that over his head. Now, stop the boat dead in the water. Once you have furled the jib and dropped the main, you pull the victim to the boat and tie him to a convenient cleat. Run a halyard to a loop in the LifeSling line. Recover the victim by hoisting the MOB out on the halyard, nestled in the LifeSling harness. Here are some advantages of a LifeSling. You do not have to sail alongside the victim. All you have to do is circle the man overboard to have them back in contact with the boat. There's less chance of hitting them with the boat and a lower need for precision boat handling. You use the LifeSling as the hoisting device to lift the man overboard out of the water while maintaining continual contact. The MOB always stays connected to the boat. Also, you never have to reach down. This helps on boats with high topsides or in large seaways. Double-handers or cruising couples can more easily recover a man overboard with the LifeSling. The helmsman remains behind the wheel for the circles with the sheets untouched until the MOB has the line in hand. A single person on deck can hoist the victim aboard in the same sling used to recover them.
So I've spent a lot of time on this. I hope I've convinced you that the LifeSling is a significant advantage. Just as a sidelight, this has also been picked up by the commercial fishing business. If you ever watch Deadliest Catch, they have an incident where somebody goes over the side and you'll see them throwing a LifeSling to that victim. So this is a great tool. And again, we need to incorporate this at a higher priority in our training. If you don't have a LifeSling, most people have throw bags. Or for some reason you can't deploy the LifeSling, and Jeff will tell you about that. Use the throw bag. Here's a couple of tips we learned is throw it from the foredeck because that pulls the MOB amidships. Have a second one in the cockpit if the first one misses. So here's a quick example of a throw bag recovery. Again, this is from that photo I showed you before.
Just grabbing the man overboard's hands.
So here goes the throw bag.
Toss a throw bag from the foredeck and have cockpit crew ready to heave other lines if the MOB is missing one amidships.
So she's getting pulled just about to the midships gates, and that's where they're going to haul her out. So this is going to be a successful MOB recovery, keeping the boat away from the person. Again, the LifeSling is preferred because you can pick them up like a water skier on a 150-foot line, but this is much better than trying to just maneuver the boat alongside somebody. Let's not kill more people with bows. Another finding, use the engine. And, you know, in all our training, we talk about sailing up there and things like that, and the answer is modern boats have much more powerful engines than they did in the old days. And so it makes a lot more sense to use the engine. First rule, of course, is make sure there's no lines in the water because you don't want to wrap a prop. But it certainly helps in fine tuning, especially the last two lengths of a return, where if you're under sail, you've got to flog the main or trim the main. You know, with an engine, it's much, much easier. And certainly if you're going downwind and you have to recover somebody, once you have the chute down, the easiest recovery is to use the main and motor to get back to the person. It's probably the best way. So racers, retrain your brain. It's okay to use your engine during a race to pick somebody up out of the water. Please learn how to use the engine. And again, we're going to be changing our dogma to emphasize this a little more. Personal AIS units. For those of you who don't know the initials, it's Automatic Identification System. And all boats, most modern boats have these little units that broadcast through a VHF channel to the world where they are and what speed they're going. And many of you have seen that recently in the vessel stuck in the Suez Canal all those little dots are the AIS units on all the boats. So this one goes with your body and is attached to your body. It picks up the read from the satellite, and this MOB, it's called a MOBI-1, on the man overboard, broadcasts the AIS signal up to your chart plotter. And the chart plotter puts a little dot there and says, that's where you are. That way the boat can return. And if you get really sophisticated, you can also have it connect to your VHF radio. And the minute this thing hits the water, it's going to send out a loud quark. And anybody on the boat that didn't see you go overboard is going to know you went overboard. So AIS units are great. Definitely want to use them, but there's always a but, especially with new technology. You have to know how to program it initially and how to pair it to the boat's radio. There's some nice videos that Mark Lency of the CCA in New York has put together about how to do that. And I can get you those videos if you want. The other thing is you have to know how to turn it on. We had only 2 instances of our 22 where the AIS unit was critical in the recovery. And one of them was an almost funny story. The person went overboard and was swimming around for about 45 minutes before he realized his AIS unit hadn't gone off. So he finally looked down, determined it hadn't gone off. He was able to set it off manually. In 15 minutes, he was back aboard. And in that entire 45 minutes, the crew on the boat was totally dismayed. There were high waves. They didn't know where he was. The person in the water was totally dismayed. Are they going to come back and get me? 15 minutes later, it was all better. Also, like everything else that's modern, you have to test it regularly to make sure the batteries are right, things like that. Where do you carry it? For most of us, you pack it within your life vest. Here you can see it pinned onto a manual inflator. This will be a mouth inflator valve. There's a lot of recent information that the triggering strap on this comes loose from around the vest. What happens is you have a triggering strap, and when the vest inflates, that sets the thing off. These things slip, slide. So if you put it in your vest and you wear your vest for a 4 or 5 day passage, open it up after day 3. I bet you'll find that the triggering strap has either come loose or slipped. So you need to know how to turn it on manually. Other things that come up where the man overboard can add a lot to their own recovery. And there's a number of good papers out on this. There was an incident with a guy named Mark Wheeler off the boat, Meridian. And again, I can get you that paper if you need it. But here's some things that we learned from him and from about 5 or 6 other instances. 1, turn on your light. Don't assume that the light on your life jacket is going to go on. Turn on your AIS unit. We just talked about that. Use the whistle regularly. Whistles have been proven to be very effective at attracting boats. And in several of the instances we saw where somebody's overboard, the life jacket wasn't perfectly fitted. Either it wasn't inflating behind their neck properly. In Mark Wheeler's case, he hadn't had it properly clipped on in front. Rich will tell you about crotch straps if they're not on. The answer is, though, a lot of people have survived if it's not perfectly fitted. So you can make it work probably by crossing your arms over the life jacket. If you have a spray hood, know how to use it. Keep watching, know how to keep from getting cold. Most importantly, you learn from all these stories is have a positive mental attitude. That's what saves you. A couple cases we had where the person slid overboard and was tethered on. Both of them were from the foredeck. This brought up a lot of discussion. The answer is if somebody's sliding off the foredeck, for example, on a jib change and you're going upwind, tack the boat aback, heave the boat to, such as what we did at the start of the quick stop. Have a hove to boat. It lifts the MOB out of the water. It stops the person from getting dragged through the water. If you're the foredeck hand, you can slap a halyard right on the tether that's now going up over the lifelines and grind that up. That's part of this midline lift that Rich is going to talk about. But it's a great, easy way to just pull the person out. If you're leaning over the lifelines trying to pull up on them, you're probably going to break your back. If you're the person in the water in this case, you have to make a very important choice. If you're getting towed behind the boat so fast that you're almost drowning, and you see no way to keep yourself from drowning, you may have to release your tether from your life jacket if necessary. In the case that was so famous in the English Channel off the boat Lion, the skipper, who was a person in the water, was unable to release themselves from the tether, and therefore we lost that person. Major finding, and this is not out of our study, but rather out of every MOB training program we've ever done, practice on your own boat is key. We can train you on boats that we borrowed during a seminar, or you can watch somebody else do it on their boats the way they do at Navy. But you need to know how your boat behaves in recovery maneuvers. How fast does it slow down? How much drive does it have? And you also have to talk about, with your own crew, who's assigned to do what? What happens if you're on or off watch? Who's going to replace the MOB? What if it's the foredeck man? What if it's somebody who's the jib trimmer in the cockpit? You also have to practice at night. Listen to Renee Mel, who's coming up next. She's going to tell you all about practice. Some other findings. We have a lot. I just talk about a couple here. There's no safe place once you're above decks. Over half of the fatalities in the cases we were able to study fell out from the cockpit. So as soon as you come on deck, you have to be clipped on. It's not, I'm okay, I'm safe in the cockpit, but I'll clip on if I have to go forward. That doesn't work. Half the fatalities fell from the cockpit. The MOB button on your chart plotter, or sometimes it's by your helm, is a great tool. When you push that and ignite the navigation devices, it marks where the person went overboard, not where they are. The AIS unit will do that because there's drift, but it does mark where the person is, and that's key in going back. And you'll listen a lot on the talk that Jeff Schaefer is going to give about MOB buttons. The trick with MOB buttons, of course, is you have to make them work. There was a very tragic loss of life in a major ocean race where the person went over with an AIS unit. And unfortunately, the ship had lost its VHF antenna earlier in that leg of the race. So the AIS unit was able, may or may not have been able to transmit. They don't know, but they weren't able to receive it. The helmsman pushed the MOB button. Now the MOB button, however, requires be pushed for 5 seconds. Yours may differ, but on that one, you had to do it for 5 seconds. He held it for 4. So they lost the location of the person. They lost the person. Other things, issue a Mayday in both Michael and Jeff's presentations later. They mentioned that they issued a Mayday. This is great seamanship. We don't emphasize it enough. Remember, you can always cancel a Mayday, but it doesn't hurt to get help. You need good lights for night recovery. The way we talked about scattering scattering cockpit cushions and things like that. During the daytime, a number of boats have gotten floating flashlights. Turn them on, throw them out, makes it easier to find the person at night. The same way a cockpit cushion may help you locate somebody during the day. Obviously, you need strong spotlights. Know your equipment. Again, life slings, AIS, Mom 8s, all these things require maintenance. Make sure you maintain them. A problem that we haven't solved yet is how do you pull a person out on a smaller boat? There were 2 fatalities, one off of Moore 24. Again, Michael may tell you about that one, and another one off in Etchells. We haven't solved the problem. When you get the person alongside, how do they actually get them out? I'm going to take about a minute here to talk about drowning. At the end of the AMETI analysis, somebody, I don't know whether it was Sally Honey or somebody else in that group, just happened to throw in the fact that drowning does not look like drowning. If you're a lifeguard, this is nothing new. For all of us who haven't been, the answer is you don't know what a person looks like who's drowning. They're not sitting there waving their hands, folks. That's not what's happening. I don't think your crew member is safe just because they aren't waving their hands up in the air. Again, drowning doesn't look like drowning. Learn that. Of course, the key finding in all cases but one, the one we talked about, the MOB was not clipped onto the boat. Folks, clip on. That's just important, important, important. And Rich, I know, is going to go over some prevention issues, but this is a key finding. Clip on, guys. So I'm going to lead you with the 2 phrases that I leave everybody at the end of every training session. One is, we can teach you a lot of things, but you need to practice on your own boat. And the second one is, the best MOB recovery is the one you don't have to make. So clip on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dick. You're now going to hear from our 3 panelists, the first of whom is the remarkable Renee Mell, who had been the Vanderstar Chair in charge of sail training and safety at the U.S. Naval Academy, and for the last 10 years has acted as the director of the offshore sailing program at the Academy, in which cadets learn how to sail in only 2 weeks and are then sent offshore bound for remote ports. Renee has been sailing since childhood. She was crew in a Whitbread race. She was a women's world match racing champion. She's worked in 2 America's Cup campaigns. The list of her accomplishments in racing and as a professional captain are too long to enumerate, but we're very lucky to have her with us today. And so Renee, over to you, please.
Thank you, David. My goal this morning is to talk you into practicing man overboard recoveries on your own boat. You're going to learn a lot this morning. However, just going to a safety at sea seminar and learning the different recovery methods or attending this excellent lecture is not enough. The next step is taking what you learned back to the boat that you sail on and starting your season with some practice. There are preventative measures that you can take to ensure your crew doesn't go overboard in the first place, clipping on, like Dick just mentioned, but you also need to take steps to ensure a successful recovery if someone does go overboard. So a big part of that is knowing how your boat and crew is going to behave in different conditions. The best way to figure that out is to practice. The military is really good at doing drills. Their philosophy is excellence in the basics, so that if conditions change in a real world situation, they can adapt quickly on what they've learned when in time critical situations. That is exactly what we do with our 2 offshore sailing programs at the Academy. I'm going to help you take that step on your own boat by describing what we do so that you can develop the safety culture on the boats that you sail on. At the Academy, we have 2 big boat programs, the offshore racing team, which you might be familiar with, and my program, which focuses on professional development. And we teach the midshipmen experiential leadership, seamanship, and navigation in the course of a month. The common denominator with both of our programs is that probably about 95% of the midshipmen do not have a sailing background when they start our programs. You might have a semi-professional crew or a fully professional crew, or you might enjoy introducing new people to the sport and take family and friends cruising. But absolutely everyone will benefit from practice because it does take good teamwork to accomplish a successful man overboard recovery. So both of our programs start our seasons with man overboard practice in our local area. Dick had talked to me about a watch bill or an emergency bill that assigns people to a specific job during a real emergency. We do have that. However, since you never know who's going to wind up going swimming, we rotate the crew through all positions during a man overboard during their training period. We have Navy 44s, which are big, heavy, traditional style boats. We also have donated boats that the racing team uses that include Reichel Pew 66, a TP 52, Curve 50, a couple of FAR 40s, and we use different recovery methods based on the boat type. For the green crew on the Navy 44s in my program, we start out on a light air day with heaving to. We talked earlier about, stop the boat however you can and stay close to the person. That's a great way to do that. If you have a huge mess on your hands, just simply heaving to will stop the boat and keep you in the vicinity of the person in the water. That also gets the boat into a safety position. It stabilizes the boat so that the crew can focus on any emergencies that come up, since you only need a helm to keep the boat in position. It also demonstrates what happens when you tack the boat, but not the jib. So it's heaving to. It happens to be the first step in the man overboard quick stop maneuver. So next, the skipper or the helm will demo a quick stop, which is what we use on the Navy 44s. I recommend for the first time starting, with our program, because we have all novices, we start from an upwind position to cement the process before adding the next level of difficulty, which would be maybe, you're sailing along on a beam reach when the person falls overboard. So there is a little bit of trimming involved as you come up and go through your heave to. It helps if you bring some visual aids to use on the boat, like the diagram of a man overboard drill. That helps the people who are visual learners at least get that process in their head. It also helps if the skipper talks through the process as they do their first demonstration of the man overboard. Again, that's good for people who are better auditory learners. And then the skipper will debrief what they did right and not so right afterward, and then get each of the crew members to do the same for the position that they were in. It's not a bad thing if the skipper messes up the approach on the first man overboard, because in the debrief, it points out, you can use that as lessons learned. It points out what went well, what didn't work well, so that the next time that you do it, you can focus on those things and get those basics down. In our practice, in both offshore teams, we rotate, for instance, clockwise one person, whether you have a full crew on deck or whether you just have a watch section on deck. Say the main trimmer goes to the helm, helm goes to trim, trim goes to the foredeck comes back to trimming the main. And we also utilize our crew, the person who just did the position, to brief the person that's about ready to try it for the first time, So that helps, again, cement that process in their head. This helps a lot for the people that learn best by actually doing things, or kinesthetic learners. Plus, the added bonus is that rotating crew through all the positions is going to help them understand what needs to happen at each station and how their actions are going to impact others on the team. You'll be able to see what position your crew does well in also. Another added bonus is that it makes it more fun for the crew who, maybe the person that just does the tack line on your boat never gets the opportunity to drive the boat. Makes it a little bit more fun for them. They're more likely to come back. They see that you have dedication to making the boat a safe place to be, and it just increases their overall skill level as well. Dick talked about, the importance of turning the engine on in a high performance boat. Add that into your practice. So again, it builds that muscle memory. We do practice turning the engine on at some point during the quick stop, just so, again, when it comes to crunch time, it becomes an automatic response. That's what you do. You put your hand on the key before you, and then the throttle, and then before you engage it in gear, you ask for a line check overboard so you don't compound the problem that you may already have on the boat. So next up, keep doing this until everybody is comfortable on the final approach timing and how the boat handles in light air, and then do it again on a medium air day. I guarantee you the boat will likely react differently. Then you go out on a day when there's 20 knots in chop or big ocean swells. And again, if you have a boat that you can reef the mainsail, throw a reef in the main, because you might find that you need to start your final approach back to the person in the water a little bit sooner because you're going to go sideways once you take the jib down without a full main. That gets you familiar with how your boat handles in different conditions. And then, because people rarely fall overboard on a nice calm day, gets you practice when things are a little bit more intense in different weather conditions. Practice with all of your equipment too, like Dick mentioned. Just add it to the routine. If you're using a throw cushion as your man overboard, take the heaving line and practice trying to hit it with the heaving line. It's actually not that easy to throw and actually be accurate. So if you practice with it ahead of time, you're one step ahead of the problem. Deploy the life sling, get it out there, do circles around the cushion in the water, see if you can get the line to the cushion in the water. On our Navy 44s, we actually have one of those old school man overboard poles with the hole in the transom to keep it in. So we practice with that at night. It's a little bit easier when you come alongside to actually pick it up and get it back on the boat. It has a big strobe light too. I will tell you from doing man overboard practice at night that strobe light for helmsman is a little disconcerting. So if you are seeing it for the first time during practice, it's not going to be as disconcerting when you are actually trying to pick somebody up out of the water. As Dick mentioned, make sure you know what that AIS PLB looks like when it's armed and activated, even if it's just looking at the owner's manual. All crew need to know how to use that VHF radio. When we're doing our drills, we actually have the navigator hit the man overboard button, and on our Furunos, you can do a 2-touch thing. There's a soft key on the screen you can use. On the DSC radio, it is a hold and press it for 5 seconds. And so you just need to incorporate everything that Dick just talked about into your practice. So once you get all that down, graduate to a night man overboard. We have found that using one of those 2.5-gallon water bottles filled up with a little bit of water and a glow stick is actually pretty visible at night with a little bit of chop. We have also tried to use our orange K-Pox with a strobe light. Sometimes those flip overboard or flip upside down, so you can't see the strobe, and it is a little bit harder to find. And I can tell you that if you can't find it and you don't report it to the Coast Guard, you might get a call the next day from the Coast Guard who might be a little upset that they've just spent a little bit of time looking for the person that might have been in that. Because, as everybody knows, if you have anything that floats on the boat name should be written on it, so they can track you down and find you. On that note, it's also a good idea when you do night man overboards to issue a secure day call for any traffic in the vicinity who might see your strobe light or something bobbing in the water that looks unfamiliar. So we continue to drill once we get out on the ocean, since those conditions are going to be a little bit different than when we get in the bay. The racing team does a Delmarva or Delaware, Maryland, Virginia Peninsula circumnavigation. And during each open water segment of the trip, there is a skills race. So on the Chesapeake Bay and Ocean Legs, they have to conduct drills, including, say 4 upwind and 4 downwind man overboards, both during the day and at night. And I will tell you that practice for them pays off in spades. By the time their summer season starts, they typically do 30 to 40 evolutions of a man overboard recovery. And they have picked up their own crew have fallen overboard during practice. And they've also been out on the race course locally and picked up man overboards from other crews, other boats on the race course within a minute, while the other boat was still struggling because they hadn't gone out and practiced. And I can tell you, if you practice during an actual emergency, your stress level is going to be pretty high. But if you can rely on that muscle memory, it's going to be able to alleviate that situation a little bit. So the first line of defense is to stay on the boat. We always wear PFDs whenever we're on the water. It's a regulation for us. Mandatory tethers at night and in bad weather. And it's also a good idea to know your boat's features on the deck layout, where are the risky zones to avoid. If you've got new crew, let them know that. Do a brief when you have new people introduced to the boat. Where are the handholds on the boat, on deck and around the companionway? Where are the tether clip-on points? If you've got a double tether and you've got to go forward, where can you clip on to the next point and get to someplace further forward? And what are your handling characteristics in various wind and sea states and sail configurations? That's going to help you to be able to recover the person overboard in all kinds of different conditions. So wearing a PFD is mandatory at the Naval Academy. I found that that's become a habit, and I wear mine all the time whenever I go sailing, whether it's with friends or family or at work. In summary, let's see, start your season out right by actually scheduling man overboard recovery practice time. Perfect your windward spinnaker drop, and then do a spinnaker quick stop on your way back in from winning the race. The only way you're gonna really have this become part of your safety culture is to actually schedule some time, whether you're coming back in from a race, you're gonna go out and start practicing for, spring sailing. If you haven't already been out on the water, just throw some man overboard practice, spend an hour, and then maybe a half an hour and throw some random drills in throughout the season so that you don't lose that muscle memory. Again, stay on the boat or at least attached to it. Become, again, familiar with your boat's handling characteristics in all conditions, and train with absolutely everything on your boat. That's the way you're going to get familiar with it, and nobody's going to be surprised and not know how to use their AIS or other pieces of equipment that they have in their life jackets. That is all that I have to say for this morning, and I wish you the best with your racing and cruising seasons, and get out there and practice. Back over to you, David.
Good. Thanks very much, Renee. I've had my boat in Europe for more than 20 years now, and I learned very quickly over there that there was no shame. And 20 years ago, you were considered a little bit of a wimp, I suppose, unfortunately, if you wore a PFD all the time. And so we adopted that practice, and we never leave the dock, a mooring, an anchorage without everybody in PFDs. We have the same tether rule that you were espousing, always at night, always when shorthanded, always in any kind of inclement weather, and always whenever I say so to crew. And so next we're going to hear from our next panelist, Michael Maradzada. Michael, I think of Michael as the CCA member extraordinaire, because he does so much, including acting as our webmaster. He's an avid ocean racer, was Commodore of the Pacific Cup for a time, and he's been in innumerable Transpac races, half of them with podium finishes. Most recently, he and his team took first in division in the 2019 Transpac aboard his Santa Cruz 50. Michael's going to tell us about the rescue from his boat in the Pacific in the middle of the night of one of the best known yachtswomen in the world. And so, Michael, you're talking to us from San Francisco, where by now I hope it is daylight. You got up awfully early. Oh, it looks very bright behind you, Michael. Excellent. Okay,
well,
so
yes, I'm speaking from the middle of the Pacific. Actually, we've got the actual crew here behind me in my virtual background. Thank you very much, David. I'm going to share, I hope, our slides here. And I called this, can you see that screen there, David? Great. I call this Pride Goeth Before a Fall Overboard. I want to tell the story. We had just an unbelievably excellent crew. I was feeling pretty confident about everything I knew. And let's see if I can get this to go forward. Here we go. As David mentioned, I'd been a Commodore of the Pacific Cup Yacht Club twice. I'd done, a dozen Trans-Pacific crossings in the Pacific Cup or Transpac. As the communications boat and racing, I had coordinated a number of rescues, directly participating in the tragic, fatal low-speed chase incident. I'd done a mid-ocean rescue of a boat about 1,000 miles offshore. Pulled a guy out of the water who'd be dead otherwise at St. Francis Stag Cruise. That's kind of a shameful story. Had been asked by U.S. Sailing to look into the Morpheus incident that I'll talk about very briefly. So I was, as I say, feeling very clever. We had an amazing crew of America's Cup and Vendée Globe veterans. I led a CCA seminar on how expert sailors get into trouble by being overconfident. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Very briefly on the Morpheus incident, as David mentioned, this was a Moore 24. The skipper, a very experienced sailor, somehow fell off the boat. It was a local race, no lifelines. The crew had not really spent much time practicing man overboard. Their gear was somewhat deficient. The life jacket did not inflate. As near as we can tell, and the Coast Guard conclusively concluded, what had happened was on the attempt to retrieve the man overboard, they probably hit him with the hull and fractured his neck, and he drowned. And this was sort of an unfortunate series of events. There were actually 4 total people in the water falling or jumping for various reasons. So, the lessons we had taken from that were service your inflatable and practice, much like Renee was talking about. I've got a link to the report there. So with all that in mind, all that safety information, and I had presented at a number of U.S. Sailing Safety at Sea seminars, thanks to my friend Chuck Hawley, who invites me to these things. We were ready to go. Got my boat, my Santa Cruz 50. It has previously won Transpac a bunch of times. We follow all the safety equipment rules and exceed them. First-rate crew, same rule as David describes on life jackets and tethers. We won the first leg of our race, finishing in Monterey, actually where we nicely reconnected with some of the people we'd been doing the U.S. Sailing Inquest with. We start leg 2, 25-knot winds, 4 to 5 foot seas. What could possibly go wrong? Coincidentally, these are the same conditions that the skipper, the Morpheus, went over it. So because it's rough, we're careful. I have to confess, we performed a somewhat cynical man overboard drill on the way to the start in San Francisco. I realized that we had not performed our annual test. So we threw a cushion overboard. I pretended to be the person in the water. So I took myself out of the equation, turned the helm over to whoever showed up to do it. It was Tom. And, after 2 or 3 passes, we picked up the cushion, called it done, and discussed it briefly. So that was a negative on us. On the other hand, all the gear was right. I had inspected every life jacket, installed these Moby 1 beacons, which are fabulous. Never, by the way, had any issue with the string coming loose. Put in a permanent man overboard button. We mounted and repacked all the man overboard gear, and we had jacklines. So we're doing all the gear stuff right. We were having a great run down the coast, broad reaching at 20 knots, looking at the log. We had actually hit 28 knots at one point. I get up at midnight to come up with Molly for my watch change. And we round up because that happens in heavy weather sometimes. Dee, and I'll talk about her in a second, flies past me. I'm sitting on the low side. She's on the high side trimming. I hear a squeal and a body whoosh past me. She goes over the lifelines and into the water.
Michael,
so what do we do?
Take a minute to explain who Dee is.
I thought I had a slide on her, but I apparently don't. Dee Kafari is, as David said, she's just a phenomenal yachtswoman. She was granted the honor of a member of the British Empire in the Queen's Honors List after one of her early circumnavigations. She circumnavigated 3 times solo, twice the wrong way, 6 times circumnavigation, including the Vendée Globe. And I have to add, I could not ask for a more charming and competent crewmate on the boat. In fact, for our second crossing, when she came along, I actually promoted her to watch captain, which was very generous of me. I was fortunate to sail with her. And she's going to talk, she has talked about it, and I'll relay what she had to say about this as well. So body flies past me. Everybody hollers man overboard. Molly, very competent, keeps her eye on Dee, moving to the back of the boat. Liz, who had been my navigator, former Rolex Yachtswoman of the Year, makes the Mayday call on VHF and did contact, had a conversation with Coast Guard. In fact, it wasn't a Mayday call to the sky. I'm going to talk about what Brett did on the wheel in a second, because that was critical to this working. Because she flew right past me, I turned around to reach and grab her out of the water. Because of course she's tethered, except for one problem. She's not tethered. She's in fact 30, 40, 50 feet behind the boat. As I move back to the transom to retrieve her, I hit the man overboard button, which sets off even more alarms. At least Harry and Patrick moved to the foredeck to start to douse. One thing we do not do is launch the man overboard gear. And the reason for that, Molly is there ready to do that, but she looks back and sees that Dee is already at the transom. And the reason for that, which I'll talk about in greater detail. Oh, there's Dee's picture. The reason for that is that Dee is a superb athlete, and she has not let go of the spinnaker sheet. So Dee is extremely fit. As she said, I knew they were trying to get the spinnaker down, and I was hindering that by holding onto the sheet, but there's no way I was going to let go of it. She held onto that thing. The spinnaker sheet, we believe the pressure on the sail pulled her back to the boat, so that by the time we got to the transom, she was actually at the transom. She was within, as she conjectures, a minute or two of losing any ability to keep holding on. So let's talk a little bit about what happened on the boat. The plan of record for the boat in such a situation was to do a quick stop maneuver. Beginning immediately with stuffing it up into the wind. I believe that our boat could take, virtually any kind of punishment a spinnaker could give it. What we were doing was we had been going about 22 knots. As the roundup began, we slowed down. We can see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, probably not, it's too small. You can see here, this is probably about where Dee fell overboard at 6:52:23. Within half a minute, we've brought the speed down to about 2.5, 3 knots. with an apparent wind angle of 50 to 70 degrees. So while the intent had been to do a quick stop with D at the transom, what we effectively did, I've been thinking about this, what we effectively did was heave to with the spinnaker flogging. Within a minute or so, we had the speed effectively at 0. It took us several minutes to bring D aboard for a couple of reasons I'll talk about. But stopping the boat was critical. Even if she'd been separated from the boat, it would have reduced the separation. With her connected to the boat, it gave us the ability to go from a terrifying emergency to a merely scary emergency. We had separate activity going on at both ends of the boat. One group at the bow getting the kite down, one group at the back getting D aboard. We couldn't get the lifelines open. I'm going to speed up because I overused my time. So we needed to attend to getting the lifelines more workable. The lessons we basically have are, practice and demand a culture of safety. D freely admits that, she should have been tethered. She wasn't tethered. It was a mistake. We had a spare life jacket. That was very handy. The man overboard beacon performed well. You want to be sure you can open your lifelines if that's part of retrieving somebody. Having a spare set of clothes was nice. For the individuals, clip in, take the boat to the wind when you got the kite up so you can get it down. Skipper needs to coordinate communication and make sure you can open the lifelines. And these people are all still alive, so it all worked out. And sorry for rushing at the end, but I did set a timer so I wouldn't overdo it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Very illuminating, and sounds as if you would have been able to rescue her anyway. You'd stop the boat, even if she hadn't held on to that spinnaker line.
Honestly, I'm not confident that's the case. It was blowing 25 knots. There were high seas. That's a very risky situation. Without being connected to the boat, we both believe she's lucky to be alive.
Thanks to you and to your crew. Next up, speaking to us from Milwaukee today is a Great Lakes sailor, Jeff Schaefer. And the first thing you want to know about Jeff is that he has recently been awarded U.S. Sailing's Arthur B. Hansen Rescue Medal, which is given to recognize the significant accomplishment in seamanship, which has saved a life. This is a really harrowing story. Jeff's going to tell you about competing in the 2020 hook race out of Racine, Wisconsin, on his J111 Schmokin' Joe. He's been sailing for 57 years, moving up. He's been in charge of and in 18 Chicago Mac races, Bayview Mac races, and has sailed quite a lot double-handed as well. So Jeff, if you would take over this podium, please. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here this morning and share this story with everybody. Just first I'll go through what kind of led up to the incident, and then I'll talk about what we experienced and then what we did to get Sarah back on board. Just a little background. This was this last summer. It's a 2-day race from Racine, Wisconsin up to Menominee, Michigan, about 189 miles long. Starts on a Saturday. It's usually a Saturday, Sunday race. Generally, the course goes along the western shore of Lake Michigan, up along the Wisconsin shore. And then we'd pass through a narrow passage called Death's Door into Green Bay and then finish in Menominee, Michigan. The conditions for the day were typical warm summer day. Winds typically out of the southwest, ranging from anywhere from probably 10 to 25 knots, mostly downwind. Our course north was somewhere in the 335 to 360 direction. We've seen these type of conditions in the years past. There was a prediction for severe thunderstorms. Severe thunderstorms, as you may know, they make that designation when the winds are expected to be over 50, could be over 50 knots. So we have satellite connection on our boats, and we were able to watch the development of these storms. Actually, they were predicted, so we kind of did some pre-planning in regards to that. Actually talked to the crew on what might happen and what my intent was if we felt that there were going to be those types of storms. So that evening we were tracking these storms developing over northern Wisconsin. They indeed developed in that midnight to 3 a.m. Time frame. One of our pre-planning goals was if we felt that we were going to be hit by a severe storm, we were prepared to in time take the main down. I had experienced this in previous years, very similar conditions in a different boat where we had been knocked down, and that was the Wingnuts incident in a previous Chicago Mac race. So indeed, approximately 3 a.m. in the morning, I made the call that that's when our watch change occurred. So we had all hands available. I called to get take the main down, properly lash it to the boom, and we were sailing along in a nice southwest breeze with our number 4, watching the storm approach. Not visually because it was a very dark night. 3 of our crew members went down below on watch, off watch, and then 5 remained on deck, myself being the helmsman. We prepared the boat for the storm. We secured the hatches, the ports, and the companionway, just in case the weather did get severe, which we expected. Made sure everybody had their foul weather gear on. Most importantly, life jackets, their harnesses, and of course their tethers. All 5 people were clipped to the boat and to the jack lines. We felt we were pretty well prepared for the storm. The wind, as I said, all day was pretty much out of the southwest. As the storm approached, we encountered a wind direction change. The wind dropped in speed, but it went from southwest to northeast, which would be typical for the inflow into a severe storm. So we most of the day we were on port tack. At that point, we went on the starboard tack again, just with the number 4. The wind was out of the northeast. Then, as you would expect, the wind shifted direction back to the west, which was the beginning of the outflow from the storm. We went back to port tack, had the jib sheeted in, and we were pretty much just beam reaching with that wind out of the west. Probably velocity was maybe 10 to 15 knots. I can't stress this enough. There was it was an immediate, we're talking seconds, and the wind shifted back to the northeast, and it literally went from 15 to 50 to 70 knots within seconds. The boat was knocked down with the jib aback. So everybody that was on the port side, which would have been the high side normally, was on the low side. This was, again, instantaneously, there was the heavy wind, rain, boat knocked down. Basically, the spreaders were in the water, and visibility was close to nil. At that point, 2 crew members were swept overboard, over the top of the lifelines. both, as I said before, had been tethered in, but inexplicably, one of the tethers, the quick release at the harness, released, and that was Sarah. Initially, we weren't quite sure who was on the boat, who wasn't on the boat. I yelled to the crew, you know, is everybody here? Everybody kind of checked in, and they said, no, Sarah went overboard. Immediately, we yelled, man overboard. We were unable at that point to even have any visual of her. Everybody was basically on deck that was still on deck, was holding on. We certainly didn't want to have anybody else go overboard. Unable to actuate the man overboard module simply because you couldn't reach it. If you tried to do that, basically somebody else would go overboard. Below, Mickey, our navigator at the time, heard the man overboard, attempted to activate one of two man overboard buttons. There's one on the radio, and then there's also one on the chart plotter. Interestingly enough, the chart plotter, as in your race, you have the chart up, and in this particular software, it does not have a man overboard button on the chart that you have up. You have to actually go back to the main menu to activate the man overboard. Kind of picture yourself, pitch black, boat on its side, instruments are on the starboard side, the boat's laid over on its port side, and you're trying to reach the instruments. Mickey made a very innovative and quick decision. She couldn't activate the man overboard, so she pulled out her cell phone, which is never far from her, and she took a picture of the Latin lawn. And ultimately, that was one of the key things here to be able to determine where Sarah went overboard so we could get back to her. We were laid over in this position for probably 5 to 7 minutes, maybe even up to 10 minutes. Then what happened was, if we can move on to, we're in the right screen, that's fine. The storm abated. One thing I want to point out, and I've been through this numerous times, whether it's been on my J111 or my Nelson Merrick 36, or I sail starboats also. When you do get knocked down, don't touch anything. Just the storm will go away. It's not going to last forever. Don't panic. Just it'll be okay. If your boat's maintained and it's well designed, it'll be fine. So anyways, the storm did abate. We immediately dropped, the boat came back up. We dropped the number 4 immediately, started the engine. If we can move to the next slide, please. We made sure, and we do this as a matter of course, anytime we start the engine, make sure that there are no lines overboard that potentially could get in the engine, into the prop and make the situation even worse. Okay, so I went through the part about the taking the picture. Mickey at the same time radioed the Coast Guard. We were very fortunate. We were only 6 miles away from the local Coast Guard station at Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. So they answered quite quickly. We had a little bit of a issue as far as that picture. It wasn't the best of pictures that she took, as you might imagine. And when she radioed in the Latin lawn, the Coast Guard responded that, well, that can't be right because that position's on land. So they re-looked at the picture and determined where the mistake was, and then we did have a good position at that point. We broke out the high power searchlight. However, we had been spun around and were frankly disoriented as to where we were. I mentioned before we had been traveling at a direction of about 335. At one point, we were actually traveling at a direction of 190. So it was hard to really get a gauge on what direction to start looking until we ultimately got the man overboard position. Once we had that position and bearing, we started in that direction. We had 2 crew members at the bow and 2 on each side of the boat. One of the crew members at the bow, if we move on to the next slide, please. One of the crew members at the bow saw a strobe light, or thought they saw a flashing strobe light. I want to point out here, we were heading in an easterly direction, which would have been away from shore. It was still dark, or this occurred at approximately 3:30 to 4 o'clock in the morning. And that was very helpful in that we had a nice dark background for that, that we could determine that in fact it was a strobe light. If Sarah would have been between us and shore, it would have been a little bit more difficult because we were within 5-6 miles of shore, and there were a lot of shore lights, white lights, and it would have been more difficult to determine that that was a strobe light. The other person at the bow confirmed that in fact they had also seen it. I asked how far off the bow it was. I then saw it. Now we had a good position. We motored at full, our top speed, motoring speed. At that time, the sun was just starting to break enough that we had some daylight. We then got a visual that it certainly was a person, and then we got close enough, and we determined that Sarah was conscious because we were able to verbally make contact with her. We attempted to deploy the life sling. However, it did not deploy properly and the line got tangled. So we made one circle around Sarah, and then we came back and I said, let's deploy the throw bag. So one crew member very accurately, overhandedly threw the throw bag to Sarah. She was able to grab it. We brought her alongside once we had identified her and got her basically attached with the throw bag, we did contact the Coast Guard, who we visually saw in the vicinity doing a search pattern. They immediately came in our direction. We got Sarah on board. Initially, she had said that she wanted to continue on with the race. The crew below had already prepared the blankets and to get her down below and warmed up. But when the Coast Guard came alongside, she decided that maybe she should go in for medical attention. And so then they came alongside. We transferred her to the Coast Guard boat, and then they took her in for medical care, which was basically a little bit of hypothermia, and we saw her again that day at on shore by noon. So that's the basics of the situation and the recovery. What I wanted to point out as far as lessons learned here: number one, prepare your boat, prepare your people. Run these different scenarios through your mind so you can act very quickly. Make sure your equipment's maintained. Make sure that the person in charge personally inspects every person's own gear on our boat. A lot of the people that our crew, they supply their own life jackets, harnesses. So we make sure that the person in charge inspects that. Train. We do our at least annual man overboard drills. Also, I want to point out that U.S. Sailing Safety at Sea course, which 5 out of our 8 people had taken, is an excellent course, and that was very helpful. And then know the basics of how to get somebody, how to get somebody back in, but you do have to improvise because things often change that you, as the MOB button shows, we had to improvise. And then the last thing is you have to work as a team. We did get this award this year, but I've always said that this was certainly a team effort. Everybody had a part in it, and but you do have to have a person that's in charge to direct the team. So that's we were very fortunate that we were able to get Sarah back on board, and it was not a situation that I'd like to do again, but it turned out well. So thank you for this opportunity to share this story with everybody, and I'll answer questions later if there are any.
Jeff, thank you very much. That is an incredible story, and it was great preparation, clearly, of the boat, the crew, the equipment, the maintenance of the equipment, the execution. The award for exemplary rescue was more than deserved, and it should be mentioned that the award went to the entire crew, but you get full credit for being a great, great leader and making it happen. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Welcome.
And so now on to Rich DeMullen, consummate volunteer and yachting superstar. Besides the America's Cup campaigns, transatlantic races, the 25 Newport Bermuda races, Transpac, Sydney, Hobart, Fastnet, you name it. Rich has also campaigned double-handed for 20 years, and he and Rich Wilson still hold the record for the run from Hong Kong to New York on the clipper ship Sea Witch that had stood for 154 years, and they've now held it for something like 20 years. For the past 25 years, Rich has organized hands-on safety at sea seminars for the Storm Trysail Club that have trained over 5,000 young people and 2,000 adults in seamanship, leadership, and safety, including revolutionary man overboard recovery procedures. Rich belongs to Larchmont in addition to the 3 sponsoring clubs today, and was a former Commodore of Storm Trysail. So Rich, over to you.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to be building on the excellent seamanship shown by Michael and Jeff, Dick's comments and research, and in particular on reinforcing Renee's comments about seamanship, leadership, and training. The 4 subjects we'll be touching on will be how not to be a man overboard, the new midline lift, developing your own plan, and then touching on powerboats. Leadership is so important, has a direct impact on crisis situations such as man overboard. But the leadership begins by being responsible, accountable for preparing your team to go to sea and to practice. The best way to emphasize what train the way you fight, fight the way you train is, I love Julius Caesar's quote, which is, without training, they lack skills. Without skills, they lack confidence. Without confidence, they lack victory. The Marines say, train the way you fight, fight the way you train. That's the practice that Renee was describing. The crisis you plan for. All the practice gets you ready to deal with a crisis, but very few crises are exactly, come at you exactly the way you practiced. But by practicing, you're able to adapt and to prevail to the situation, as Jeff and Michael were demonstrating. And adapt and prevail is the famous quote from John Bonds, who founded Safety at Sea as we know it today. Stop, act, think is a basic guideline for crisis response. The stop is interesting because our first response is quick stop. And the quick stop is more than just stopping the boat. It's also giving time for the crew to get ready to go back. Imagine you have a watch at the middle of the night and you have 4 or 5 people on watch. One is on the helm, one is in the water, one is the pointer. You don't have your crew available to actually do anything other than prepare to go back. Stop, act, think. First, quickly go through how not to be a man overboard. Crotch straps are critical. Any of you who have been in a swimming pool doing the survival swimming know the difference between having and not having crotch straps in terms of keeping your head above water. Jack lines. How you set up your jack lines is very important. By twisting them, it makes them much easier to clip and unclip. The flat webbing doesn't lay on the deck. And you have to learn the use of your short and long tether. Also, the straps, as opposed to a rope jack line, won't roll under your feet. I like to terminate jack lines well before the bow and well before the stern. At the bow, it keeps you from going over and actually touching the water. Also keeps the foredeck clear for your jibs. On the stern, by terminating forward of the corner of the F deck, if you go overboard, you will not drag behind the boat. You'll be dragging next to the transom. And each boat's different, and that's why you have to practice this on your own boats and prepare. But on our boat, particularly for double handing, we have an old jack line. We hang it over the stern, and we have another old tether secured to the backstay up here. And if somebody goes overboard, they're within reach of this old jack line hanging over the stern, can grab on. The other crew drops the tether to them. They can clip on, and then they're secure. And so happens on Express 37, you got built-in steps, and you can actually, if you're in good shape and not too tired, pull yourself back up. Rich Wilson taught me this on the trimaran. Straddle the jack line, use one hand to pull up, and you're stable, and it frees your other hand. Extremely important. You'll see this in a video later. You go up and down the companionway clipped in. A very high proportion of man overboards occur from people coming up or going below. You're high in the boat. If you're coming on watch, you might still be half asleep. If you're going off watch, you might be tired. You're more vulnerable to the boat rolling. So this is a great habit to form. So you're never in the companionway without being clipped on. Cabin top jack lines. These are not in place of your deck jack lines, but this jack line is so easy to grab hold of, clip on, run forward, and it's not hidden by sails on deck. It's easily available, and it's great just as a handhold. Women, please excuse us, but a good portion of the man overboards, a disproportionate number, are men who go to the stern. And on our 3 Carino transatlantic races with Rich Wilson on the trimaran, we avoided the stern of the boat. And it's a dangerous place. When the boat's pitching in waves, the stern is pitching, and you're not in balance. This is the safest way for men to operate. It's not a joke. Please consider it. There's other safe practices. I'm not going to go through the details, but to avoid going overboard, things like good non-skid paint, using headlamps so you have free hands to hold on. All these things are important. If you're a long distance cruiser, higher lifelines, triple lifelines, not double. By the way, this will all be posted later, so you don't need to worry about missing anything. Know your equipment. Know your inflatable PFD. Do the annual maintenance. Know the 3 ways to inflate it: automatic, manual, and the oral tube. AIS beacon, same thing as discussed. The MOM, how to launch it, what's in it. The life sling, how to use it. We'll get more into that. Man overboard buttons we talked about, and your chart plotter. Know your boat. This is a failing that most people unfortunately succumb to. They actually don't know their boat well enough to do the right man overboard drill, to tailor it to their boat and crew. As discussed, the boat is the biggest threat to the man overboard. The modern designs handle poorly. Chines, which a lot of boats now have, are particularly dangerous because the man overboard coming alongside can slip underneath the boat and get slammed down. That's one of the things that generated this midline lift we'll discuss. Traditional designs handle better, but they still are dangerous. And if you practice quick stops, you'll find out how your boat operates. A quickie, double rudders, but with the prop in the middle, you have no control at low speed. Interesting in airplanes, when they have twin engines, they put twin rudders, one behind each engine. The midline lift, it's easier to show than to talk about, but the idea is that as the man overboard is brought into the boat, they're actually lifted up in the air. There's no chance of sliding underneath the boat. This is on Comanche. pros use rescue swimmers, particularly on boats like Comanche or big trimarans, which are very hard to maneuver. And the rescue swimmer goes out and grabs hold of the MOB, and then the midline lift gets applied. We're not suggesting using rescue swimmers. If you have some professionals on board, they get professional training, and you practice, and you're in a big offshore race, it's very effective, but it's not what we recommend for normal use. The life sling is what we recommend. So here's a rescue swimmer tethered to the boat heading out. In effect, he will become the life sling when he reaches the MOB. Now, Comanche has a chine, and she's also very hard to maneuver at low speed. So their preparation is they drop all sails, motor back, which is what we're going to recommend. We're going to recommend a life sling. Now that the rescue swimmer is going to clip the MOB on, and then the crew of Comanche will put a halyard on the life sling rope, the tow rope we can call it, and hoist it. And as they hoist it, the man overboard not only gets pulled into the boat, but gets lifted up as they approach. It's a 1-to-2 mechanical disadvantage because you have the halyard clipped onto the line. But there they are being pulled in quickly. And you can see the upward pull as they get in. They immediately get pulled up. There's no way they're going under the boat. So to do this, your life sling rope, the tow rope, has to be cleated, secured to the stern of the boat, just like described before. You can put an eye on it if you want to reduce friction a little bit, but it works fine with the halyard clipped directly onto the life sling rope. We replaced the life sling rope with floating red Spectra because in hoisting it, it's a heck of a lot less stretch and it's stronger. But the life sling rope does work. The life sling rope has to be shortened so that when your halyard gets up near being too blocked, the length of your life sling rope from the stern to the top of the mast, A, and then back down to the top of the life sling, so the MOB clears the lifeline. A plus B is the length of your life sling. Now, if you want to keep your life sling rope full length, then you should mark it so that once the man overboard is engaged with the life sling, you then pull in the slack in the life sling rope until you get to the mark. Either way works. From the MOB point of view, he's looking up, and you can see that this is the aft end of the life sling rope secured to the boat, goes up through the halyard shackle and down to the bridle of the life sling. What if you lack winch power? Comanche did not lack winch power or crew. The midline lift is a mechanical disadvantage. We've practiced and tried it. Any yacht over 40 feet has winches big enough to lift the MOB. 35, 40 footers, you need, if it's only one person going to be on the winch, like in double-handed situation, a cruising couple, has to be a strong person to lift the other person. If the power is inadequate for whatever reason, the midline lift still brings the MOB to the boat and lifts them partially out of the water. And they're safe. No, they're not going anywhere. They're not going under the boat. At that point, you can bring another halyard direct to the life sling bridle and get your one-to-one lift. Every crew needs to practice on their own boat with their own crew and come up with their own specific case and man overboard bill, you can call it, man overboard doctrine. In this case, we're double-handed. Quick stop as normal. In our case, we have to lash the tiller because if you're double-handed and you have to leave the helm, you don't want the helm flying around, the boat twisting. You want to be able to stabilize the boat. Our first thing after quick stop and hitting the button and deploying the MOM is to start the engine in neutral. If the engine doesn't start, then we drop only the head sail and use the mainsail. If the engine starts, we drop everything because the boat's more maneuverable and it's going to be easier to do the rest of the evolution. Let's assume the engine starts. You drop all sails, check the lines in the water, and you return to the MOB, deploy your life sling. You have to make a decision with your life sling. Are you mounting it to the starboard quarter of the boat or the port quarter? Either one works, but we put on the starboard quarter, which means when we drop our sails, we drop them on the port side of the boat. We pull the travel to port, the jib sheet to port, clear the starboard deck. We have the lifeline, life sling attached to starboard, and we circle clockwise so that the man overboard will be on the same side as the empty side of the deck, the one we can work on to hoist him up. Once the man overboard made contact, you stop the boat, lash the tiller, snap the halyard to the tow rope, to the life sling rope, and start winching up. If it's a spinnaker, it's a quick stop. If it's light or medium wind and certain amount of breeze, we don't do a quick stop, especially with double handing, because it'd be a mess. We basically bring the boat, luff the spinnaker, bring the boat up to a beam reach, and do this either the snuffer or a letterbox. Other comments, I mentioned some of this already, but in doing the midline lift, you decide ahead of time what side of the boat your life sling's gonna be mounted on, and either you're going clockwise if it's in starboard or counterclockwise port. But if you're under motor, it's easy to do either one. Dick talked about what if you're dragging on the life sling or dragging on the tether. If you're being dragged on the life sling because the boat is still moving, roll over on your back and you don't get water in your face. And all this that I've described has come out of intensive work with these guys, some of the best sailors in the world. But you have to practice other recovery methods. In effect, you have to be prepared to come alongside, because if the man overboard is unconscious or injured, they're not going to be able to get in a life sling. And so you've got to make that decision. If you know they're injured, forget the life sling. You got to go straight to the alongside. If you're not sure, when you get near the MOB, you'll find out. But don't waste time with a life sling if they're clearly not functional. To come safely alongside, it's really good to have the sails down under engine. It's much better. The next best is mainsail only and engine. Nice to come along to windward, so as you slow down, you drift slowly down on the MOB as opposed to away. It's very important that when you're doing a recovery, that the pointer move forward to the shrouds, because if the pointer stays to the stern, you're not going to be able to see the man overboard, and you have a better chance of running them down if the pointer's in the stern of the boat. Pointer's got to move forward, and out of a lot of practice, pointer's quite vulnerable because you have your hand in the air pointing. So the pointer has to really be holding on as they go forward, but it's real important that that happen. Otherwise, very risky to the MOB. The primary recovery method to get an unconscious person out of the water really is lowering a crew in a climbing harness to bosun chair with a tether or second halyard. Reason is it's really hard to latch onto an unconscious person in the water, really hard. And you don't want to have 3 or 4 passes to try to figure out a way to do it. So as soon as you have a man overboard, if it's clear the man overboard is fine and just waiting for you, all the crew can work in getting him back. But if there's any doubt, one of our crew is assigned, we actually have 2, so in case one person is the MOB, to become what we call the rescue crew. And let's watch this in action, this on the Clipper race. Note that the
moment an ocean race became a matter of life or death. Watch as sailor Arthur Bowers comes off watch and does his safety line to
unclips before he goes below. Mistake.
The crew has practiced this till it's been drilled into them, but this is no test. A life ring is thrown, it doesn't reach him.
This is 17 minutes later that they're now alongside.
A crew member in the seat in a harness, and Arthur is grabbed. The South Atlantic is cold. The waves 8 meters high.
Lowering down the bosun chair.
It took 17 minutes to get Arthur back.
Clipping on to the MOB.
Wet, shocked,
and hoisting them both together. Look at my picture in the corner. This is a rescue PFD. It's like a very fat dinghy vest. It's a good idea to have one on the boat because an inflatable PFD when you're in a bosun chair is kind of cumbersome. So having your rescue crew throw on a rescue PFD with a tether attached to it is the optimum way to do it. It's even better if that rescue crew has a helmet on so they don't get hit on the side of the boat. And somebody can be preparing to do that while the boat goes back. Other ways
Rich, sorry, you're referring to the photograph furthest right on the screen, correct?
No, the rescue PFD is what I'm holding in here in the picture.
Oh, well, we can't see it.
Can you see me? Oh, they can't see me. Rescue PFD, in fact, is a fat, thick dinghy vest with crotch straps and a ring on the back. And the safety people have these. It's just a better thing, a better use than an inflatable, which is very hard to use in a chair.
Could you hold it up one more time, please?
Yeah, can people see? I don't know if anybody can see this.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. But other ways to get somebody up, and Rob Knox Johnson for the Clipper race has those hooks that are put on a halyard and a very big built-in strop in the PFD. Now, all new PFDs have strops. When you look at them, they are very lightweight looking. They are strong enough. We've tested them, but I put on extra heavy ones on my PFD. Again, if somebody's in the water and conscious, they can clip on themselves. But if they're unconscious, at least having that on the PFD, the rescue crew going down can grab onto it. If you can't hook if the rescue crew can't hook the MOB, just a bear hug will do, and then lift them both out together. The Gale Rider drogue, which you should have as a backup for your emergency steering, also is a good basket to bring somebody up, but if they're totally unconscious, you're not going to be able to get around them. A boarding ladder, this is sold by LRSE. It's a Fiberlight ladder. It has spacers, so it's held away from the hull so you can get your hands around it. It's a terrific ladder. It's weighted at the bottom, and it's one of the only ladders I've seen that you can actually use on the side of a sailboat. But again, an MOB may be too tired to climb it. You can put a crew walking down it, but that's not as easy to do as lowering in a chair. For our double handing, where there's no way I can lower myself down in a bosun chair to get my buddy or vice versa, we have a mooring hook on a boat hook. And these are used to clip on a mooring. But the benefit of this hook is that you can reach down and snap it on any part of the PFD in the water. And we've hoisted people out of the water by putting a halyard onto every piece of the PFD we could reach, every part of the webbing. And we've hooked people up sideways, upside down, and by the neck. But it's uncomfortable, but they do come up and they are alive. So this hook would work, but it's not going to be easy to snag. But if you're a single person on a boat and there's an unconscious person in the water, I don't know how many alternatives there are. It's a good lesson to stay on board. How to practice, Renee went through this very well. A few other extra tips. An extra crew taking notes and video is interesting. A cushion is a terrible man overboard prop because it blows downwind very quickly. A tall boy buoy is best because it doesn't blow downwind. And when you come alongside to recover it, you just grab it. You don't waste time doing 3 passes with a boat hook trying to get a cushion, which is not very useful practice. The other thing you can do with a tall boy is tape an AIS about a foot above the buoy, put it on, announce on VHF if you're doing a test, and throw it in the water, and actually test your AIS and your chart plotter and see how well it works. It's really a good idea. Now, Rick Hayes is on this call, is actually going to rig one of these and throw it out for the beer can races, so people coming out to beer cans races can go test their AISs. You want to test all your equipment. Testing the quick stop behavior of a boat in different conditions is very important. And special things for shorthanded, testing your motoring characteristics at low speed in different wind and wave situations, very important. Practicing, as Renee said, in different conditions. Practicing with a throw bag is really important. And they always demonstrate online doing it underhanded, but unless you're an underhanded softball pitcher, I don't recommend it because half the time you throw it straight in the air. We've all learned how to throw a football. Just grab the end of the line in one hand and just throw it like a football. And I think you'll be a lot better off. With the juniors, we have them go back to back. We give them each a throw bag. They take 10 paces, throw around, walk out, turn around, try to hit each other. But you've really got to practice with that. And then to actually practice pulling somebody up on deck, if you have a really trained swimmer, a survival suit, a rescue boat, you can do it out on the open water, build yourself up to it. But it's much easier to actually practice this at the mooring, where you can put a swimmer in the water and you can practice the midline lift. You can practice using the ladder, the transom, the Gale Rider. You can lower somebody in a chair and different halyard connections to the MOB. If you do it at the mooring, it's much easier and you can get a lot done. It's very effective. I don't recommend doing it at a dock if you're in fresh water because of electrical risks, but salt water, it's not a risk. A few comments about power boats. This came up in a CCA call a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing how many people were interested in it because so many sailors, particularly when you retire, get power boats for supplemental cruising. The motorboat in the top left was so ugly, the birds wouldn't land on it. But it does demonstrate the negatives of a powerboat man overboard recovery. You have the high freeboard, you flare up in the bow, which obstructs seeing the MOB in the water. You have narrow decks midships that are easy to fall off, very hard to work on. You have no halyards. You have a steering station on one side of the boat, which means you're blind on the other side if there's somebody in the water. You have propellers that in a twin screw boat are right next to the side of the boat, very close to an MOB. Not as dangerous on a centerline motorboat like a lobster boat, my boat down below. And often you have a stern platform, which is good, but you have dinghies on them, which obstruct. The positives are a powerboat has speed control, immediate start and stop, reverse, no sails to douse. It has an immersed transom, so the transom isn't likely to land on the swimmer. You do have some risk with the swim platform. I gotta be careful not to bump the head, but the swimming platform is a big help in an MOB. My boat, we have a single shackle release for the dinghy so I can clear my stern platform. Also the dinghy secured to the boat with its painter is not a bad thing for an athletic MOB to climb up onto or hold onto. But the risks of, so the stern platform is a great place to bring an MOB, or if you have a ladder, you can hang right over the side of the boat near the stern where the freeboard's low. Again, your propeller, and this boat's in the center, but as soon as the MOB is in contact, you can shut your engine off. If you're going to spend a lot of time on your stern platform, diesel exhaust actually can knock you out. So again, shut your engine off. Okay. There's 3 cases that we came up with for a motorboat. Now, quick stop is still your basic mode. But one is if you see the person falling overboard, like they're on the bow and they're falling off, you turn the wheel fast to the same side. You want to kick the stern away from the MOB to protect them from the propellers. This is what ships do, and this is what a motorboat should do. In sailboat sailing, it's not an issue. But the quick turn towards the side, the MOB, so the stern goes the other way. Then you do your quick stop, throw flotation, hit MOB button, all the normal stuff. But if the MOB is gone and they're stern, no point doing the maneuver. You just do the quick stop, throw flotation, the button. If you have extra people on board, a pointer helps. But on a motorboat, more often than a sailboat, you got a crowd of people, they're drinking, who knows what. But all of a sudden you realize somebody's missing. If you presume they're MOB, you quick stop, but you write down your course because your response is going to be motor back on the reciprocal. And in a crisis, it's easy to forget where you were pointing. So write down the course, then hit the button, locate yourself, get on the Mayday, because you don't want boats crossing your wake to run the MOB over. You want them to be looking. And you go back on your reciprocal, and because you're a motorboat, every now and then you got to stop, go into neutral, and listen, because your engine might otherwise drown out the voice or the whistle. The primary recovery method, life sling, safest way. Just like a water skier, most motorboaters are probably better at this than sailors are. Again, your life sling has to be on the same side as your steering station so you can see the MOB as you circle them. And the rest is pretty normal. But as soon as they make contact with the life sling, you can shut your engine off and you pull the MOB to the stern. Alternatively, if it's calm and you have a very good helmsman, you can pull alongside the MOB 15 to 20 feet away and either use the throw bag or throw the life sling. And once they make contact, shut the engine off and pull them in.
Rich, I'm going to jump in for a minute and just say to the attendees that Rich has something like 2 more slides to go. And so we understand it is now, we're 2 hours into this, which was the scheduled time. We will get to the questions that have come into the Q&A. So you're very welcome to stay on, those who have the time and the interest, but we understand if you need to jump off. Sorry, Rich, go ahead.
No problem. Be finished in a sec. These are other suggestions for powerboat. One that's most interesting is the helmsman has to be situationally aware of what's going on. If the helmsman sees traffic or wakes, warn the passengers. If you have to know where all the people are in the boat. If there's somebody on the foredeck or up on the cabin top, you should know it. And every throttle and shift change on a powerboat can really cause people to lose balance because of the sudden change of speed. So helmsmen have to be aware of that. And if you're on the boat, you ought to be holding on to something because of the same situation. And the most dangerous place is standing on the foredeck. You see motorboats with people standing, kids crowded on there. Even with PFDs, they go down off the foredeck and they're chewed up by the propellers before you can do anything. So it's not a really good place to let people be. But same as the sailboat, you need to match your MOB plan to your boat and crew and practice it, the most important takeaway. And finally, just like on the sailboat, you need to have your own man overboard plan. And this summarizes what we just talked about for the different alternatives. So thank you very much, and back to you, David.
Okay, thanks very much, Rich. I wondered, Rich and Dick, before we begin the Q&A, if you could summarize just very, very quickly, what are the new elements in MOB recovery that you've brought to the table today? The midline lift, the hook for double-handed, the ladder you showed, perhaps, Rich, the rescue PFD. What else do you want people to focus on? Dick, do you want to take that first, just very quickly?
Well, the things we're learning, of course, I think I mentioned these are, too many people have been killed by being hit by the boat. So our, even though the life sling is not new, it's a tool that we kind of used to have as a secondary tool. As Rich just pointed out with power boats, the life sling should be your first go-to in terms of picking up somebody. Now, if you get up close to them and they're unconscious, as Rich said, you've got a different issue. But the first practice you ought to have is use the life sling. Don't try to bring them alongside. Too many people get killed with even a very good skipper trying to bring a modern boat alongside. And to build on what Rich said, power boats at low speed tend to be, if they're getting caught by the wind or you're still in the water, they can start sliding in weird directions too. Rich and my lobster boats did that less, but you get the modern power boat and a lot of them just can slide sideways. So your first go-to should be the life sling. And the other thing that, again, it's not new, but you got to practice. You just have to practice on your own boat.
Right. Well, that's a good segue, actually, before I turn to you, Rich, if there's anything else on that list of what's new and different, is a question that came in from Vice Commodore Paul Sabatakis of the New York Yacht Club. And he said, if you had to pick one, which is better to have ready to deploy, a life sling or an MOM-8? And Michael, do you want to answer that? You did in text, but the audience can't see all those answers or even the questions.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And of course, you should always be carrying both, particularly if you're offshore. But remember, the goal is to get somebody back on the boat. The MOM-8 unit is a fine unit. I've got the S version. That's principally to mark a spot on the water that you can see from a distance and come back to, but it doesn't get the dude back on the boat. So if I had to pick, I'd pick the life sling.
Yeah, I want to build on what Michael says is what you're doing when you drop the MOM-8 immediately is providing flotation for the person if they, for some reason, they're not wearing a life vest. And that pylon, as Michael said, is a wonderful marker. And that's totally a different function than recovering somebody with a life sling. I don't view this is an either or. They're two different tools. One is flotation and marking. The second one is recovery.
Most people don't know it, but some of I believe the recent moms have a lifting eye on the top of the pylon. So if the MOB goes to the horseshoe and gets in it, you clip a hydro to the top of the pylon, and eventually you get down to the MOB. It's quite a daisy chain of objects. Life sling is easier to use for that, but the mom actually can do that. But I think marking the spot is the key. And the life sling, I would just add, don't deploy it too early. If you wait until you're in the vicinity of the man overboard, you can see them, and then you start trailing it, because you may have some maneuvers getting back, and you don't want to tie knots in the life sling. Like in a sailboat, if it's blowing 30 knots, you may not want to jibe back to the MOB. You may want to do a tack around, a chicken tack. And you don't want to put your life sling out ahead of time and cross your wake with it. So the life sling needs to be deployed, but you don't deploy it until you're on the approach and see the MOB.
Thank you. Rick Hayes sent in a question, or concern rather, about the AIS as an MOB device, all these various initials. Also talks about DSC signals. And Renee, I wondered if you would address that as you did in the text that you responded to Rick Hayes with.
One of the things we found with our AIS PLBs is that we probably—
Would you say what a PLB is?
Sure, it's a personal locator beacon. There are different types. Some of them work and send a satellite signal up to the Coast Guard, and others are equipped with AIS, which is going to send a signal within radio range to other, not just your boat, but also other boats in the area. I think the range for ours is about 4 nautical miles. I do know from our own practical experience that if you have an AIS and VHF radio splitter, that you just need to be mindful when you're trying to track a man in the water with that AIS, that you are not also trying to use your radio at the same time, your ship's radio. It's better to communicate on your handheld VHF.
Right, thank you. Dan Eben, if I'm pronouncing the last name correctly, wrote in a question and concern about tethers that are opening up and people going overboard from the snap hook on the from the hook on the boat end. Rich or Michael, would you like to address what we in the safety world are discovering, if anything, about hooks that are opening?
Yeah, Rich and I spent a lot of time talking to Jeff Schaefer on why Sarah's tether became undone at the chest end. And in fact, Jeff may have some more information about how easy it is. But in looking at all the incidents, that's the only one we found where somebody went over because the chest end opened up. Renee obviously is disagreeing with me, but I will say that there are 2 other instances where it would have been a heck of a lot better that we know of if somebody had been able to open their tether because they died.
So at the Academy, we recently purchased some new tethers, and we had an incident during practice for our volunteer instructors on a dark and stormy night where 2 of them in quick succession, they were, I think they were up at the mast trying to do a sail change, opened up unexpectedly. And we discovered that the pull lanyard actually had a loop in it. And that was the problem. We got permission from the manufacturer to sew those shut. So that has not been an issue since then, but it's something to look out for to make sure that your lanyard that comes with it doesn't have a loop in it, or that you don't replace it with one that has a loop on it.
One of the things we're doing at US Sailing is going to try to delve into this a lot more. So Renee, I'll touch base with you about that. Thank you.
Jeff, I think you had some experience with a quick release problem, did you not? On your boat?
Right. We did a little analysis after our incident, and both Sarah's and my tethers and on the quick release had that long lanyard with the loop in it, and that is our suspicion that somehow got caught. So in both of our cases, we've actually cut the loop part off, which leaves about an inch of sewn lanyard. And then Sarah's son is an engineer, and he did an independent test on the quick release and the amount of pressure it took to release it, and it was only 3 pounds of pressure. Now that was not in a loaded test; it was a static test, but that was kind of interesting. So,
right, Rich, did you want to add anything to this discussion?
Yes, I think that an important reason to have the release at the chest is that the practice of going below tethered and then taking your chest clip off when you're in the cabin sole and then clipping it back on before you go on deck. That's not feasible if you don't have that chest release. And I think practically speaking, that to me is the biggest advantage. I'm not a big fan of the idea that I'm going to be drowned on the side of the boat and have to release from the boat. That's like the choice of two evils. But the practice up and down the companionway is made possible by the chest clip. And I've also cut all my lanyards down to 1 inch. Now, there was a question also about if you have a tether, which has a 3 foot and a 6 foot section.
Rich, would you explain, I'm sorry, would you explain to people exactly what the lanyard is on the tether?
Yeah, I'm talking about the lanyard on the shackle. So the same as Jeff did. Cut it really short, barely enough to get your forefinger and thumb on. That's all you want. But when you have a double tether, short and long, one of them you're not using. Most people just take the one that's not being used and clip it to their D-ring. The problem with that is if you then do the chest release, you're still clipped to your tether because the other clip is separately on your D-ring. So the tether you're not using should be clipped onto the base of your shackle, your chest shackle, so that when you pull that chest shackle, both parts of the tether go away. So clip your spare tether onto the eye of the shackle that you're using as your chest shackle.
You've just answered the question that Justin Bauer had, but Dick...
Dick is showing it there. That's it.
What Rich is talking about, here's the shackle that goes to the chest end. Here's the tag that Jeff Schaefer and Renee apparently have shortened. I think I'm going to shorten this one. But this is my spare. The other end of this, of course, is going to where I'm tied down, but this has got to be on the shackle so that if I do have to release, this is not connected to my body. I can clear it.
Right, thank you. John Norton Moore says, what is the best PFD for family cruising on the Chesapeake with guests who are not sailors? That answer is pretty simple. The one that you're going to wear, the one you're comfortable in. Something is better than nothing. Anybody want to add to that? Michael, anything?
Yeah, I keep a couple of these light spin lock ones. I mean, our offshore crew wears the big old, offshore versions, but there's a lightweight version that's pretty easy to put on. I put them on a couple of cousins just this weekend, and they were fine. They're about $185 or something, but they work well. And for the kids, just a standard non-inflatable because they can't be trusted to inflate on hitting the water. That, by the way, as long as I'm talking, a point that has come up in a number of sessions is, and I think this is part of Navy training also, those self-inflating vests, pretend they aren't. Your intent when you hit the water should be grab that tab and pull it. And the self-inflation feature is only there for in case you're unconscious or forget. It's not reliable. It shouldn't be your first resort.
Michael, you might want to answer this one also from Brian Hill, because you alluded to a MOM 8S. Could you explain the difference between the 8A and the 8S? And the question is there consensus as to which one is preferred?
Is there consensus on anything in this group? But so I'm sure everybody is somewhat familiar, but just so that we're using the same terms, you're required to carry a floaty thing with a life ring and a sea anchor and all that kind of stuff. And we talked about this earlier. When somebody goes overboard, you throw that overboard to mark the place and maybe give them some flotation. Traditionally, there was a non-inflatable version with a long fiberglass pole. I had some issues with it because of poor design. I would lean right over in the wind, for example. And I actually modified mine. But the folks at, I forget who, have come out with the Mom versions, the inflatable versions. The first was in a case called the Mom 8, and you had to take it to your local shop to get serviced. You needed to mount it correctly. All of these you need to mount correctly so that when you deploy it, it actually deploys instead of just hits the rail. So the Mom 8 is in a hard case. The Mom 8S is in a soft, round package. That's what I carry right now. The reason I carry that is twofold. One is it is user serviceable. I can repack it myself. Takes a couple of hours, and if you lose a piece, you're sad, but you can do it yourself. The other is, the reason I carry these at all is they're just much easier to stow and deploy. I can mount it on the rail. I pull one thing and it goes. The pole plus the life ring plus the other stuff. It was such a fussy bit of, kit that I was worried all the time that it would get snagged when we were trying to launch it. So it's your own choice. It's finance. It's whether you think you might use it twice on the trip, which was my concern.
Right. You've also answered a question that Bruce Swanson had, and there have been a couple questions that have come in about halyards. Should one halyard be dedicated to man overboard, not used for anything else, Rich?
No, it's not necessary to dedicate it, but I saw Bruce's question that all of us from the racing point of view tend to cut the tails off our halyards to save mess and weight. But if for an offshore boat, you need a longer halyard. And in my case, my life slink's to starboard. So my starboard spinnaker halyard, I've got an extra 20 feet on the tail, and that allows it to be easily run around the boat and hooked to the life sling rope. I think that if you go offshore, you need to at least make sure one of your halyards has enough extra tail on it. And I think you'll find that you don't want to cut the tails too short offshore anyway. So while it's not dedicated only to man overboard, it's long enough to be useful. That's really important. Now, while I'm on, I've put on this Rescue PFD now that I'm on film here. And it's basically a thick dinghy vest. And in the back, there's a ring so that it's very handy to use for either a real rescue swimmer or for the rescue crew in the bosun chair.
Right, a question came in from Steve Prime. This is going to be our last one. We're out of time. And Steve asked, what's the consensus about wearing boots in the water? That question pops up actually in the quiz. So it gives me an opportunity to say here at the end that the answers to the quiz will be sent out to everybody. You can score yourselves. No prizes this time, I'm afraid, but you can determine how much you learned in this presentation. But Renee, do you want to answer that question about the boots since it came up in the Q&A?
Sure. It depends on the conditions. So if you find yourself in the water, I had a dinghy crew back in college who was wearing boots and a dry suit, and she wound up kicking her boots off because they were dragging her down. But if they're not dragging you down, leave them on. I also read an interesting story probably about a summer or two ago, or maybe a little bit longer, about a commercial fisherman off Long Island Sound who went off the back of the boat. Don't think he was wearing a PFD. The boat was on autopilot. His partner was asleep. He used his brand new boots to turn them upside down, catch some air, and as flotation. So in that case, I would definitely keep my boots with me.
Right. I think it's Rich or Dick who have a definite point of view on this boot matter. Rich.
Dan O'Connor, who's the best water trainer we've dealt with, everybody jumps in the pool. He asks them the question, then he has them take their boots off. And I have yet to see any boots that sunk. They all tend to float back up. So the only reason in that case to get rid of your boots is if you're overboard and you have no PFD and you can use them as a PFD, or if you're having to tread water, you're better treading water without your boots. But if you have an inflatable PFD, there's no reason to tread water. Save your energy, pull your knees up, plug your knees, stay warm.
You don't want to lose the heat through your feet either.
Exactly.
Good point.
Okay, well, it's time to wind this up. And first of all, great thanks to our brilliant speakers and panelists. Thank you all for putting in the formidable amount of time that you did into this. As I mentioned, the quiz answers will be sent out to everybody who registered at the 3 clubs. This event will be posted on your club websites in a few days. And great thanks again to Tim Hill, the man behind the scenes in the pilot seat for the New York Yacht Club, who's the director of communications. Very hard to do these things without him directing us and doing everything that's required on the technological side. So thank you. Until next time, this is the New York Yacht Club, CCA, and the Storm Tristle Club signing off.